So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 64, and I'm really excited to welcome on Ryan Delk, who's currently the CEO of Primer. So Primer is an education platform that's reinventing childhood education, starting with homeschooling first. It's a relatively new startup that's raised from top investors like Founders Fund, Naval Ravikant, Village Global, and Harry Stebbings, just to name a few. So prior to Primer, Ryan was also the CEO of Omni, a rental marketplace that raised over $32 million in venture capital. So Ryan, welcome to the group chat, and it's definitely great to have you join us here today. So I've been following along with you and some of the marketplaces that you've been building like Omni for quite some time now. So I'm really excited to learn more about it today on the chat. Before we jump into things though, I think it'd be great if you can start by sharing a little bit more on your background for those that don't know you.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for having me. This is awesome. Yeah, my quick background is I've been building tech companies for the last about 10 years here in San Francisco. Actually broke into tech by way of Nairobi, Kenya. Ended up there in the middle of my sophomore year in college doing an internship and got connected with sort of the tech world there. And then that's what sort of like got me actually out wanting to come out here to San Francisco. And so I've had a little bit of an interesting journey out here, but been here for about 10 years, sort of been involved in started on the growth side of things, growth and sort of BD and then moved into product and then became a COO and then now CEO. So I've worn a lot of different hats, had some wins, lots of losses, lots of lessons learned. But yeah, it's been a really fun few years out here.
That's awesome. Yeah, you definitely had quite the background and experience. So I did want to bring up Omni because a lot of us here in the marketplaces world, we're aware of it and we're kind of following Omni. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about maybe some of the kind of learnings and lessons from Omni that have kind of helped you now with Primer.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Omni, so what we were trying to do, the sort of thesis was everyone owns lots of stuff. And in cities, you have a very high multiple of the number of things that could ever be needed to be in use owned by people in that city. So for example, in San Francisco, there might be 30,000 tents or something, 25,000 tents. And, probably on any given weekend, the most popular camping weekend of all year, there's probably 5,000 of those in use, maybe max, maybe less. And so the idea was you have all this sort of excess stuff in cities. What would happen if you could sort of pool the storage of those things and then give people shared access to it? And so we started with a storage, the first app, the sort of first version of the app was a storage app, because we wanted to aggregate supply. And so the idea was, let's get a bunch of people to give us their stuff that we can store. We charged per item. So the idea there was that if we had some marginal costs on a per item basis, it wasn't based on cubic feet, then people would be more likely to give us things of value. And so if you had to pay 50 cents or $1 for everything that you stored, you're not going to give us a bunch of, dirty old shirts. You're probably more likely to give us a bike, tent, camping chairs, a camping stove, a surfboard, whatever it might be. And so that worked pretty well. We got to $1 million in ARR, like relatively quickly, I don't know, like 14 months or something. And then we turned on the marketplace where people could rent stuff. And so then all of a sudden you could rent anything you owned in Omni, you could opt in to the supply side of the marketplace. You could also deposit new things if you wanted to supply things. We actually had people that were literally buying things professionally to rent out on Omni, like starting little sort of like micro stores there. And then if you wanted, you didn't have to have anything in Omni to operate on the demand side. You could just participate on the demand side, just download the app and or go to the website. And what we've learned was that the quality control on secondhand rental items is extremely hard. And so the people that did the best and the items that were the best were the people that were sort of doing this professionally, and they were like actually buying things and putting them in Omni to rent out. And what they would buy is like very, very durable goods. And so they would buy like a bike that was like meant to be, rent out, not like a $90 bike that they bought at Walmart. They would buy like a surfboard, not like a really nice surfboard that they might use personally 5 times a year, but they actually buy a surfboard that was like meant to be sort of operated at like a rental surf shop. And those things worked really well. The problem for the other stuff is that there's natural wear and tear that happens when people use items. And so one of the really tough challenges was that this natural wear and tear, the owners of the items had this sort of psychological standard that that the item should come back to them in the same condition that they put it in an Omni. And what's fascinating actually is like, this actually applied to storage as well. And so we had all these funny stories where early on we were storing bikes, and someone would put their bike in Omni for like 6 months, and then they would get it returned, and they would be furious that it had flat tires. And they're like, well, when I put it in, it had the tires were full of air, and there was no like recognition of like, yeah, it's been sitting in a warehouse for 6 months. Like tires don't just infinitely hold air. But we realized like psychologically they viewed Omni as like this sort of like time freeze on their items, and we needed to return things in the exact same condition. So we built a whole system where like every single bike that went out the door to return to an owner, like we inflated the tires, we washed it down, we made it like look super clean. And these are things that we had to learn the hard way. And so imagine that magnified towards people renting your items, where actually like real damage can happen, and they can ding them up, or they can lose them, or they can get stolen, or all sorts of different things. And so we realized that it was going to be extremely difficult to sort of reach this like platonic ideal that we had of sort of using people's excess stuff to as the supply side of this marketplace, just because of the way that people viewed their items psychologically. And so we ended up sort of shifting the supply side of the marketplace to actual retail locations and that already rented things. And so we would allow basically places that were like a bike shop, for example, or a surf shop, or like someplace that rented out like electronics equipment or speakers or things like that, to list their stuff on Omni. And the reason why we did this was because of two things. One, it helped dramatically with the logistics. So now we had all these effectively like drop points all over the city where we didn't have to go deliver all the items as we were doing previously, which is very expensive. And even with a like fairly optimized like logistics product and logistics network, we were still at like $12, $13 in cost per delivery. And you can really only pass on like $5 to $6 that cost to the consumer with like an Amazon Prime Now world where people just assume like delivery should be free. And so it's very hard to make those economics work. And so it's much more palatable to have people actually picking up and dropping off at these various retail locations. And so we rolled that out, and that actually worked a little bit better. But sort of in that same horizon, we decided to sell the company sort of right after we rolled that out. And so we never got to see it sort of like whether that would have fully worked. But yeah, it was it was extremely fun, extremely brutal, 4 years, and learned a lot. But it was one of those things that I still feel very strongly like someone will figure it out and someone will make it work. But there's some real psychological hurdles that you have to overcome for people.
That's super, interesting. Thanks for sharing with us. Yeah, it sounds like quite complex. Quite a complex marketplace, but it does keep resurfacing though. I keep seeing a lot of people trying to take a crack at it again. So kind of jumping into, to Primer, which I'm really excited to chat about. Can you kind of, before we really get into it, could you maybe give us like a high level overview of it as a business?
Yeah. So what Primer is trying to do is we believe that the current education system is not serving kids super well, and specifically that it's underestimating what they're capable of. And when you look at all the other companies that are tackling sort of education online, or whatever you want to call it, ed tech, whatever those industries are, most of them are effectively porting the school experience, like classroom experience, onto Zoom or onto some other format. And really the goal is to sort of like achieve the same outcomes in a classroom, but online, decrease the marginal costs, democratize access to it because it's on the internet, which is like fine. And I think it's working for a lot of companies, and it's probably, a net positive for society. And so there's no negativity towards that. But what we're interested in actually is what are the building blocks going to look like of building an entirely new type of learning and education experience on the internet? And in some ways, like, what does it look like to build the first like internet native education company? And so what we're really excited about is what are all the things that the internet empowers kids to do, or us to build for kids, that can transform the way that they experience learning. And so as an example, one of the things that we've started doing is, so at a high level, Primer has basically three components. We have rooms, which are live audio experiences for kids. So kids in small groups, like 6 to 8 kids, will get together and they might like solve a puzzle together. They might plan a business together. They might do a business simulation. They might do a debate together. There's all sorts of different things they do, these activities that we create. And then there's clubs, which are sort of evergreen content. So kids can participate in these communities that are sort of evergreen, almost kind of like this actually, but for specific interests. And so if you're into cooking, or if you're into chess, or if you're into coding, or whatever you might be into. And then there's pursuits, which are long form content experiences where kids work together in a team to do really deep work. And so those are like 6-week plus long experiences where kids really go deep with each other, and like they have like an output and something they're trying to do together. And so they might be trying to write a book or trying to learn about space, or whatever the thing might be. And the thing that we're doing that I think is unique and that we're really excited about is after we built these sort of primitives, we're now trying to figure out, is there a way to basically turn these tools over to the kids? Because what we're really excited about is how do we actually help them co-create the experiences that they want to create. And that's the thing that we get really, really excited about. And so we're much more interested, if you think about how like Roblox and Minecraft work, where kids actually sort of co-create these worlds that they want to live in and exist in. We actually view Primer as sort of, it's not a video game, but it's more similar to that in terms of mechanics, where kids are actually able to create these experiences themselves, or co-create them, or sort of operate within the physics that we've created, but still have a lot of agency. And so that's what we're really excited about.
That's great, and there's so much we can jump into here in a little bit. But I did want to learn, going back to the early days, like what were the first steps that you took to start it? So going from like 0 to 1.
Yeah, so my co-founder and I were lucky in that we both had like sort of fairly established reputations, and so we were able, as soon as we started working full time, we were able to really quickly close a fundraising round, and so that's certainly like made it much easier, I think, for us. We felt very lucky compared to a lot of founders that are trying to meet investors for the first time. And so I think we closed our seed round in like a week, or I don't know, less than that. And then we were able to kind of get to work. And so the biggest thing for us was like building the team. And so we had some idea of like the sort of idea space, or we knew the idea space. We had some idea of the execution, how exactly we wanted to build it. Turned out we were wrong on a lot of things, but the biggest thing was finding a team. And so we knew that we didn't want to hire traditional like ed tech. We don't think of ourselves as an ed tech company, and we knew we didn't want to hire people from ed tech companies. So we really focused on recruiting people from really great consumer companies, or companies that have solved extremely hard problems. Like education is an extremely hard problem. And so people that have solved these problems and been willing to like bang their head up against the wall for like months or years. And so like, for example, people that worked at SpaceX are a really good fit because they've sort of been tasked with these like impossible things that are like very, very difficult to test, very, very difficult to know if it's going to work until it actually happens. And they're willing to operate in that uncertainty for long periods of time. So that's honestly where we focus. And we're really lucky to recruit a pretty solid team like very quickly. And then we were able to get to work.
That's great. So yeah, so you did briefly mention, others in the kind of ed tech space, I guess we could call it, taking the more kind of structured curriculum kind of approach and basically bringing the classroom online, which you're definitely not doing. So, was that like something that you decided to do like early on, or did that kind of, come about through some kind of learnings?
Well, I had a very non-traditional education. So I was homeschooled from kindergarten through 8th grade. And my parents were very, very oriented around, they oriented our education around what we were excited by, what we're interested in. And specifically, I think trying to uncover what are the places where there's some interest that can be like a thread that we can pull and help our kids like learn a bunch of other things through that interest. And so it turns out like most things that kids are interested in, they can actually learn a lot about the world, a lot of different subjects through just exploring that interest. And so my co-founder, for example, only studied physics for all of high school. And he competed internationally for the Kyrgyzstan Olympiad team. And turns out he learned a lot about other subjects through physics. You read about the history of physics, all of a sudden you're learning about history. You're writing essays and things about physics, all of a sudden you're learning how to write well. There's all these things I think people don't realize that through going really deep on one subject, you actually pick up all these other skills along the way. And so that was a bit similar to the way that my parents approach education, where they were less interested in, hey, we need to teach our kids trigonometry, and they were more interested in what are the things that they're excited about that we could use to help them get excited about trigonometry, for example. And so they didn't really care about like, is our fifth grader like exactly on the right like grade level equivalency for math. They cared about, is our 25-year-old going to be a voracious reader who knows how to think for themselves, who's very articulate, who is willing to hold like complex problems and really wrestle with those. Like those are the things that they thought about. So there's optimizing for a much longer time horizon. And so I always knew that I wanted primer to be more like that than a traditional education. And certainly not just sort of like trying to check a box and replace, the existing school system. And I think that really the thing that helped us see that was once we started seeing the things that kids were doing, it helped us see, okay, these kids are incredible and they're totally underestimated in the rest of their life and the rest of the spaces they operate in. Let's figure out how to basically give them these tools and help them, like what happens when we take kids seriously, basically. And that's what we've leaned into.
Yeah, I love the. I know you've shared on social, taking kids serious. That's I love that.
Yeah.
So you did also kind of mention the clubs and rooms. So could you maybe share more about that from the product side and what that like experience is like for kids?
Yeah. So rooms. So we'll start with clubs. So clubs are sort of like what you would expect from a community-oriented group where kids can share text, photos, videos, audio, of things they're working on, products they're doing. We have a library of products that kids can also do. So they can say like, hey, I want to like I want to invent something. I want to go like build a solar oven that like uses like the sun to basically heat up something and cook it. And so we'll tell them like, hey, here's the materials that you need, or here's, what you need to do. To go do that. Or maybe they're like, hey, I want to like learn how to build a video game. And so we teach them, we have project guides for like how to like go on Scratch and like learn how to code. Scratch is like a visual block-based programming language. Code your first video game. And so we have enough structure there that they can kind of get started on whatever they're interested in, but it's not enough structure that it suffocates them. And so they can actually do whatever they want. And so we have kids that invent their own projects. They're like sharing things that they're working on that are totally outside of the scope of like the club. But it's great because it ends up inspiring other kids. They start collaborating. And so that was the first thing we shipped. And then we realized that kids really wanted like real-time experiences. And so that's when we built rooms. And so rooms think of rooms like a canvas area where kids it's almost like a very primitive game engine where there's all sorts of different interaction modes. So kids can you can have like something like some sort of image or visual object on the screen, and then kids can make decisions based on that. And so you could say like, hey, a very, very basic example would be like, hey, here's a math problem. Like, what's the answer? That doesn't really happen in primer, but that's one very basic thing. A much more complex one would be like, hey, here's a bunch of information about this mystery or about this. Here's how this business is doing. Do you think that the business should invest more in increasing their inventory or increasing marketing spend or buy an insurance policy, or how would you allocate this like $500 they have in their budget? And then kids can select and vote and decide and sort of build consensus around what they want to do. And then based on what they decide, the rest of the room actually changes. And there's things about it that shift in the logic of how the room works. And so it's sort of this like immersive experience. There's no video, it's audio only for kids. And it's been really cool. So first Primer developed all the content in rooms, and now we're actually like letting kids develop content too. And so now there's one kid is running a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan club where they basically dissect and talk about like the plots in all these different Marvel movies. And so kids that are interested in like making movies or writing books or into comics, they all get together and they're basically like learning about like what like the best the best of the best looks like, and sort of talking about it. We have another one that's an art oriented club that meets all the time, and so kids get together like multiple times a week and they're sharing drawings, they're giving each other feedback, they're doing art swaps where they like sort of decide to draw something for the other person. And so there's a lot of different like cool emergent behavior that's happening, and that's the stuff that like we're really leaning into. And so far less interested in like how can Primer become the place that like creates the best learning experience for kids, and how can Primer become the place that empowers kids to have the best learning experiences, whether we're creating them or whether they're creating them. And so that's kind of what happens like in clubs and rooms.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, I'm sure you see quite the creative use cases there for sure.
Yeah.
So I had a question. How do you kind of moderate the experiences? Do you have like teachers or moderators or?
Yeah, so we do have teachers. We call them facilitators. So yeah, there's facilitators in all Primer hosted rooms, and then kids earn the right to be in kid hosted rooms. And so based on going through like a number of Primer hosted rooms, like engaging in clubs, and sort of we feel like they're a good fit, they sort of get access to kid only rooms, and then those rooms don't have moderators. A bunch of safety filters features built into those rooms, some that we talk about publicly, some that we don't talk about publicly for obvious reasons. But there's, for example, like I feel unsafe button that sort of like automatically pauses the room and waits for like, just creates a recording and like just basically like pauses it to make sure if anything happened, like that can be ended. There's all sorts of features around content that can be shared to make sure that it's safe for kids. So we have a lot built out on that front to make sure that like obviously kids are safe in the experience. But what's really important is like, in the spirit of taking kids seriously, like we don't want the experience to always be driven by adults. And so a lot of Primer is figuring out how can we create safe environments from a, safe in the sense of like, no harm or threat to kids in any way, but risky environments from the sense of like kids can have tension and they can actually like sit in that tension and they can have a debate and they can meet someone who disagrees with them really strongly and they can have an argument back and forth in a respectful way, but like, it's not a padded wall environment. It's meant to give kids the opportunity to interact as full humans. And I think that's the thing that a lot of other spaces for kids are depriving them of. And so Primer, we spend a ton of energy making Primer extremely safe from a sort of actual threat risk perspective to kids, of course. But then we also try to create these environments where these types of like healthy collisions can happen. And so that's something we think a lot about.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really great point. I did want to ask, how do the kind of parents sit within maybe, the messaging and kind of the building trust and, even kind of that like on the marketing side too?
I think parents love it. I mean, most parents, I think, resonate with the idea that their kids are underestimated and that they're, that I think that's what a lot of parents like one thing that's happened over the last 18 months is that parents have gotten a lot of legibility into what their kids' experiences are like at school. And one side effect of that is I think a lot of parents realize like, hey, my kid is actually not maybe getting as much as I thought they were getting out of school. And I want to be clear, like I think teachers are heroes and the teachers that have figured out how to navigate like the last 18 months are just amazing. But I think that they are not set up for success basically in the current structure. And so, there's very obvious ways in which that's true, like, sort of porting over to Zoom school and trying to recreate like classroom curriculum on Zoom, and all sorts of other ways that we could talk about ways that I don't think they're set up for success. But what's happened at that increase in legibility is I think that parents realize, wait a second, I think my kids actually might be capable of a lot more than they're getting in school. Where's an outlet for that to happen? And I think for a lot of families, Primer is that outlet that they're looking for.
That's really great. And then so I was kind of curious to learn more. What's your revenue model?
Yeah, so we take it's a monthly recurring membership right now. So it's $49 a month for the first kid, and then $19 a month for each additional kid. We're like we are 100% confident that's not the optimal revenue model. So we're going to be experimenting with pricing later this year, but that was just sort of the first thing we stuck with, and we've been very, very focused on product, and so that experimenting on pricing hasn't been a priority right now.
Got it. And yeah, then on that note too, what are some maybe metrics kind of like you guys are optimizing that you could share as a business?
Yeah, so the ones that have been really important to us over the last 3 months have been rooms per kid per week. So how many rooms is a kid attending per week, which is a really good metric for us of engagement. Some kids are just in clubs, but most kids that they're engaged in Primer, they're attending rooms. And so when we launched rooms, the first few weeks after we launched it, I think the average was like 2.5 or 2.6. And then this past week was like 5.7. So the average kid is doing, it doesn't actually schedule-wise work like this, but more than one room per day of the week, basically. now, which is awesome. And then the other thing we look at is like 10-week retention or 12-week retention. We just launched rooms recently, so we don't have very much on the 12-week retention for yet, but we looked at 10-week retention pretty closely. And we want to keep that obviously as high as possible. Right now it's over 50%, which we feel pretty good about. Basically on kids that join rooms, like when they coming back 10 weeks later, basically. And so now we're going to start focusing a lot more on growth and driving more kids into the top of the funnel. But one of the things that I think is really important when you're building any kind of company is making sure that that the core product, whatever, like the atomic unit, whether it's a marketplace selling illustrations or whether it's a tech product and you're like trying to change education, whatever the atomic unit is that you're like getting kids to do, which for us, for the last 90 days has been like attend a room, make sure that that atomic unit is A, something that people really want, and then B, they're willing to come back for. And we spent a lot of energy and time making sure that that product was in a place where we felt like it was ready for people to come back, and then waiting, one of the things that's unfortunate about looking at like 10 or 12 week retention is you have to wait for 10 or 12 weeks to figure out what it looks like. And obviously you have some leading indicators each week until then. But once we got out to week 10, we started to have a few cohorts that got to that milestone. We felt really good about it. And so that's kind of where we're at right now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm kind of curious to learn more too. Do kids, are they meeting other kids, through Primer? Or are they primarily inviting, friends maybe that, existing kind of offline onto the Primer platform?
Yeah. So one thing that's actually that will surprise you, it's extremely sad, is I would say a double-digit percentage of kids that join Primer openly talk about how they have effectively lost all their friends over the last year or 2 years. And so we have sort of like a front row seat into how COVID has impacted them and different school policies have impacted them. And so some kids do bring their existing friends if they have them, but a lot of kids haven't gone to school in a year, especially in some states. And so they either don't have relationships with their kids or they know a few people from their neighborhood. And so most kids are actually coming to Primer to meet other kids that are excited about the same things that they are. And they come to Primer to build friendships. And so, there's a lot of kids and a lot of very deep friendships that have started on Primer and are, like now they're like, thinking of 2 kids that met on Primer and they're writing a book together now. And another kid that 2 kids that met on Primer and they're working on like an art book together, a different book, an art book that they're working on publishing together. And so one of the really cool things for us, like we don't want Primer to be a place that kids consume. We want it to be a place that kids create. And so the fact that these, you come to Primer, you meet other kids, and the outcome of that relationship is not just like, oh yeah, we're friends now. It's like, oh, we're actually going to go create this thing together. We're actually going to do art together. We're going to write a book together. We're going to build a game. We're going to learn to code together. We're going to go do these nature projects together, whatever it is. That's the stuff that really fires us up. And that's the outcomes that we want to see for millions and millions of kids.
That's a really incredible story, and definitely mission with what you're building. So what is the kind of age range like right now, and then what does the future look like?
9 through 14 is the current age. We have some 14-year-olds that joined Primer like a year ago, and they're like sort of asking us like, you're not going to kick us out, right? We actually just invited a bunch of Primer kids to join us for lunch via Zoom yesterday or 2 days ago. And it was awesome. And that was one of their questions was like, we're about to turn 15. Like, are we going to be kicked out? So we're going to figure out some things to do for older kids for sure. And we're not going to let any Primer kids age out of Primer. But that's the current like sort of age that we're focused on. And the reason for that is that I'm like not a fan at all of delineating kids, like what they're ready for by age. I think age is like a very, very bad representation of that in mass, and kids develop at all sorts of different speeds. But what we found is that basically there's a lot of UI work and UX work that needs to be done to get Primer to a place where kids that can't read and type regularly to use the product, especially rooms. You can imagine like reading instructions or having to type something in the chat or read which thing you're going to vote for. And so kids really need to be proficient at reading to use the current UI and typing, which is a skill that like some 7 and 8-year-olds have, some 6-year-olds have, but for the most part, 9 is like the cutoff where you can reliably count on kids to have that. And then 14 was like sort of a 5-year age range is about as wide as you can go and have kids like sort of mesh together and be able to build meaningful relationships. I think not in person. And so we didn't want to get to a place where there was sort of like cliques forming, where it's like the older kids and the younger kids. And one of the things that's really important to us about Primer is that older kids and younger kids actually have like really close interaction, and older kids can mentor younger kids. Younger kids can ask questions to older kids. And I think that's one thing that we do a huge disservice to kids in, is that they spend almost all their time with kids that are just their age, and they don't get any sort of this like up and down interaction. And so we didn't, having a 16-year-old and a 9-year-old is not really going to be a great experience, especially for a lot of types of projects they're working on. But 9 through 14 was like sort of as wide as we could go. We feel like that's a really good experience.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I was asking, I was seeing if I was too old to join, so sounds cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it definitely sounds like, community is core to a Primer. So, what were some ways that you thought about early on kind of building such a engaged kind of community?
Yeah, I mean, we're still figuring that out. We don't have many things figured out. We definitely don't have that figured out. I think community is one of those things that you can't ever stop. If it's valuable to the business, you just can't ever stop investing in. So honestly, I think early on, our team is very obsessed with the outcomes for the kids and their experience. And so honestly, like sort of everyone just always went above and beyond for kids. And so I remember early on, one of our engineers worked at SpaceX and before Primer, and one of the kids was really interested in space. And she was kind of like, I don't remember the exact details, but I think she was either she or her parents, that like she was having trouble like figuring out where she wanted to sort of like get involved in Primer, what stuff she wanted to do, and couldn't really find. She was getting discouraged or something. And one of our engineers was just like, oh, I'll set up a Zoom, like a recurring Zoom meeting with her, and just like basically like talk to her about, like, she said she was really into space. I'll just talk to her about space and like teach her about space, and that should get her like really excited about learning on Primer. And like no one asked him to do that. No one was like, oh, Phil, like, can you please like, stop coding and like go do this like in your free time. But it was just like part of the culture, and that's just kind of how we operated. And so he did, and it actually was like a huge inflection point for her. And her mom, actually, I was just talking to her mom. I was emailing with her mom maybe a couple of days ago, and her mom actually mentioned that from like, I don't know, 9 months ago, and how that was like such a turning point for her and her journey. And so I think we've just kind of tried to bake in this sort of obsession with the experience and the outcomes of kids from a very early, like basically from day zero at Primer. And because of that, the kids feel very connected to us. And I think because of that, it gives them like sort of more comfort and connecting deeply with each other. And so when they see how much we care about them and how much we try to create an environment that is valuable for them, they actually kind of take ownership over that, and they want to create that for other people. And so one of the things that I think is a lot of people underestimate about kids is that they act very differently when they feel taken seriously, and they feel like you take them seriously. You're not trying to be pedantic or condescending or sort of dumb things down for them. And so when we Zoom with them, we have, I mean, these are 9 through 14-year-olds. We talk to them and we hang out with them just like they're like sort of like normal people talking to us. And the conversations that we have, like if we recorded these conversations and published them, like people would think that people were lying about their ages. And it's just, I think it really changes the way that kids engage. And like yesterday we had them this was virtual lunch, and one of I think the 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds was like, so at what point would you think about taking Primer public? And is there any other corporate growth that you're thinking about like in the next like 12 to 24 months? This is like a 9-year-old asking this question. And I think it's just like that person that I think was really interested in business and had read a lot or whatever, but I think it's just indicative of like kids really show up differently when they feel taken seriously, when they feel like they have a voice and they have a space that they have ownership of. And so that's what we really want Primer to be for these kids.
I love it. That's a really great story. It sounds like me when I was a kid. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. So you did mention your team, and it sounds like you're definitely product focused. So what is your team like right now, the team size and kind of org structure?
Yeah, we're 10 people. It's everyone's focused on products. So it's mostly engineers, one designer, and then a couple people focused on education, which we view as product. So they're creating content experiences, working with the product team on what new functionality should we build to enable better education experiences. So the entire team basically is working on product. We don't have anyone on marketing or growth or operations or any of that stuff.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So how are you? Yeah. So how are you? Acquiring like your first kind of users then? Like what's typical for that?
Yeah, it's mostly word of mouth. We're going to start working on growth more now that we feel really good about where retention is at and engagement's at. It's mostly in word of mouth, but we're going to start sort of building that engine now.
Got it. Got it. All right. So I did want to, I think we have to ask about it because we did have a few in the community ask me about it before the chat that unfortunately aren't on. But you definitely have some pretty incredible investors. So could you share a little bit more about what that fundraising journey was like?
Yeah. One thing I think I think there's like two ways to raise money. One is that you have a really good idea, you go pitch a bunch of investors and you convince them to invest that week. The other is you like build a reputation over many years of being the type of person that people want to invest in. And I think that sounds intimidating to a lot of people, but I actually think it's relatively easy. It takes a lot of time. So I spent eight 8 or 9 years, depending on how you count it, in the tech industry before I started Primer. And I don't think I did anything that remarkable. Like I didn't have any like crazy wins. I wasn't like employee number one in a $1 billion company. I didn't make a bunch of money on, a company going public. I worked at basically two companies. I was sort of like a nobody at Square. So I don't even really count that as like a real thing. I did work there, but it was basically like a glorified internship. And so I wasn't really a part in any tangible way of the success there. And the two other companies I worked for were like sort of noble missions. Gumroad's doing well and is profitable, and that's still around. Omni was sort of like a sort of very, very small acquisition. And so I don't have like the sort of a lot of the things that people think about, but I think what I do have is I worked really hard for 8 years and I just did what I said I was going to do. And I showed up every day and, tried to help people when I could and be the type of person that I wanted to be. And I think there's something about just just kind of doing that, like working hard, being consistent, being kind to people, helping when you can, that over time just compounds, and like enough people don't do that and sort of drop out at various points that the people that, do that for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, like eventually like people just take notice. And so obviously it's hard to know, like it's hard for me to say what contributed to the fundraising process being easy, but almost everyone that invested had pinged us or asked about investing before they even knew what we were building. And so I definitely think that if you can, if you have like a burning, like I want to go start this company like right now, like then go do that for sure. But I think that there is value sometimes in going and working for great founders or people that you respect for a few years and building a reputation, and then going on to start a company. Now, right now it's easier than ever to raise money. So we raised our seed round like a year and a half ago, but now it's like a totally different ballgame. So maybe now you should just go start whatever you want and you'll be able to raise money in a weekend. But it's definitely the market was good back then, but it was nowhere near what it is today.
On that note too, as far as the just about a year and a half ago, so how did kind of COVID impact your business?
Yeah, so COVID was interesting. So we started Primer, I think like officially incorporated in November of 2019. We started building right around then, and then we hired the first people like January, February, and then COVID hit, and it was like one of those things where like our wait list just like went vertical. Like everyone was like, signing up for the wait list, and like we were like, oh, this is amazing, we got it made. But we didn't connect the dots. So like these people were like in crisis. Like they were like they needed something for their kids to use, like a full stack solution, like right then. And we were at the time like a 75-day-old company. And I think we got too focused on like chasing the wait list and like trying to build things for those people instead of trying to build for like sort of the mission that we already had and the people that we already wanted to build for. And so for about 4 to 6 months, I think I left the team. I myself got distracted and was too focused on sort of the COVID like stuff that was happening, and trying to build products for these people on the wait list that really like were not our target market. Like they were not people, they were just people that like went to public school, private school, their schools were closed. They just needed like something for their kids to like do during the day. And it's not really what we're trying to build. Like we're trying to build a product that's really intentional, and it wasn't like the right target market for us, at least initially. And so I I think that was a big mistake that I made of sort of focusing on that too much. And then after like 5 or 6 months, we were able to sort of refocus. It's like, no, let's just like build for who we're building for. We know who the market is, and that's been that's when we got to like a lot of the unlocks that we've gotten to since then, was when we sort of refocused.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's see. Hey, David, do you want to jump on? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, definitely. So amazing, Ryan. Thanks a lot for sharing this. I actually have two questions. The first one is more about your vision. How do you see the traditional education compared to what you're creating right now, in the sense that do you imagine kids going to your platform instead of going to traditional school? Or do you see more as something you can do on top of going to traditional school? And where can you build the actual school, and where the actual school with the social interaction can actually provide something that you don't have yet? Or
yeah, so right now it's all supplemental. So either we have homeschool families that use Primer and they supplement with like a full curriculum, or we have families whose kids go to public and private school and then use Primer, supplemental after that. The like master plan does involve for sure like replacing, basically becoming a full stack experience for families. But right now we're very focused on being supplemental.
Okay. And regarding the social aspect of your platform, I'm really interested in this part, because usually when you're online, we kind of lost this kind of interaction with other, when you have people just writing through a screen and talking to someone through a screen. So you don't really have this kind of connection that we can have actually right now with the Zoom. What kind of social interaction does the kid have within your platform? Is it something like live, like we're doing right now? Is it more something that is between the platform and someone else? You know what I'm saying? Is there in between?
Yeah, so there's like basically two different modes. So one is asynchronous, which is primarily text, photos, and videos they can upload in clubs, or post like in what's called journals, which is sort of like their project logs. And then there's live synchronous experiences called rooms, where kids can join live and talk to each other in audio only rooms. And then there's also a live synchronous chat as part of that. And so we think of it as just bucketing into synchronous and asynchronous. And asynchronous is much more about posting updates, sharing your work, inspiration, things that you're excited about, giving feedback, etc. And then synchronous is really about like either doing work together, like, hey, we're going to go work on writing this book together right now for this hour, and we want to work on it, or an experience. So, hey, we're going to go do this like business simulation and figure out like the most profitable way to run an ice cream shop, or whatever they want to do. And so those are the ways that we sort of bucket it.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Those are pretty good questions. Yeah, I love Ryan. I love the simulations. So those sound really fun. So.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So we're gonna be conscious of time over here, and I think we chatted through quite a bit. I did want to ask though, Ryan, so you have some pretty incredible experience in background. So I'd love to learn maybe some key learnings or words of advice that you might have for early stage marketplace founders here.
I think the biggest thing I would say is try to be confident that your business, if you want your business to get really big, try to figure out if your business can have an accumulating advantage over time. So typically marketplaces have some version of like economies of scale or things built in. And I don't mean that, I mean something even bigger. Something about as you get bigger and you have more transactions, more users, more data, whatever the thing is for your marketplace, something about it, the physics of how that market works that will allow you to be better than competitors that are starting, even if they're growing faster than you initially, I think is a really, really important piece of building companies. And I think the first step is figure out, like, is that possible in this market or with this product I'm building? And then two is like, what is it? And I think that there's a lot of businesses that, so Airbnb, for example, has like multiple versions of this, where their ability to assess reputation on both the supply and demand side was something that they were very bad at initially and now have gotten very good at. And I think that there's there's a lot of lessons in there, and the things, pricing is another one. They've gotten very, very good at pricing, and they have a lot of pricing data now to understand dynamic pricing and maximizing GMV and all this. And so I think figuring out like what are the accumulating advantages that can be baked into your business model that give you an advantage over maybe the incumbents if you're doing something different, or at the very least people that are going to be competing with you in the future. And I think if you don't have that, it's going to be really hard to build a durable business, regardless of how big you get.
Awesome. That's really helpful, and that's a great way to kind of wrap things up here. So this is a really fun chat, and it was great to learn more about all your awesome experience and then what you're building with Primer. So definitely a big fan of it over here. So last but not least, before we wrap things up, though, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
So Primer is withprimer.com, and feel free to send that to anyone you know, or if you have kids, anyone you know with kids. And then at Delk is where I am on Twitter, and always happy. My DMs are open. Happy to chat if I can be helpful.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. Yeah, that's that's an amazing Twitter handle that you have, by the way. So you must have been early. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again. Awesome. I know everyone's going to enjoy this, the recording for this, and I appreciate taking the time to join us. So
yeah, awesome. Thanks so much.